Good morning, fellow colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. We are excited to have you this morning for this session, and we appreciate your presence in this session. As Dr. Gininza has indicated, the session is on data collection and mostly questionnaire design. In terms of the outline, we will just lay a foundation and we'll look at measurement, and then we'll go into some specifics about a questionnaire, and then we'll conclude with looking at testing the questionnaire, and then we'll just touch on some issues about reliability and validity. So in terms of the process, ideally you should start at the end when you're doing your questionnaire. So by that, I mean that you must always have the end goal in mind. What do you want to respond to? So that should always be at the back of your mind, what you want to respond to. And with that, it will help you to, as you think about that, as you carry that thought through your process, also as you do your questionnaire, develop a data analysis plan at the same time. So as you outline your questions, and on the other hand, also address the issues of how do you want to analyze this data. And I think with this approach, you can see that it requires you, even at a questionnaire design stage, to have read enough to even have an idea of what you want to see at the end. And it is actually a safer approach because as you are doing your questionnaire with this approach, as you proceed, you also are aware of where this questionnaire that you are designing, in terms of these questions that you are putting across, that you are listing, where they are going to take you. So you're able to actually to take care even of your data analysis issues. That is why we recommend this approach, that you, as you do your questionnaire, you think about the end. What do you want to respond to? And the data analysis plan will assist you. So I'm not going to go into it since we covered it in the previous workshop, but this is to highlight that as you do your questionnaire, do a parallel process where you think about where you want to go with these questions that you are listing. So your eye should always be on the analysis, because the analysis is what is going to respond to the questions that you have. That is why we say that as you do the questionnaire, also think about the analysis. In that way, you know that this questionnaire that you are doing also will be able to achieve what you want to do, because you are also outlining, as you're doing the questions, you are also outlining the analysis, and you can actually see where these questions do not talk to the analysis that you have in mind. Or as you interrogate the questions and you think about the analysis, you start to see that maybe I will not be able to present them in this way. Maybe let me change. So within that process, because you have your eye on the end goal, you able to move forward and backwards to a point where you are actually happy with the questionnaire, and also happy with what the analysis that it's going to produce as you put it on paper. So you think through about the data that you will collect, and obviously, as I say, you visualize the outcomes of your study. So at the beginning, you start with your topic of interest. What do you really want to measure? Whether it's a behavior, an attitude, what you want to classify. Then what are the indicators of that particular outcome? or those outcomes that you are interested in. And similarly, you think about what are the indicators of the independent variables that will emanate from your research questions. This is just an overall view, but I'm gonna look at a specific example just to look at a systematic way you can actually approach this. So you need to think about how the questionnaire will be used to measure, as I said, the outcome, what we are primarily interested in. And maybe you have more than one outcome. And then the independent variables. So if you have independent variables that you will be measuring in the study, you will think about now how will their questionnaire be used to measure these independent variables. And if you have variables that you're not really interested in per se, but you are aware that those variables are from your literature or from your experience, these variables have been shown to influence, to have an effect on this outcome that you are measuring, that you want to control for. So you're not interested in their effects, but because you are aware that they can influence the outcome, you want to control for them, meaning you also want to collect data for this control variables. Here they are referred to as confounding variables, such that if you collect data for them, you'll be able to hold them constant, such that they don't influence their effect on the dependent variable. You can actually control the effect. You can hold it constant so that when you do your analysis, the outcome that you observe, you can attribute it to the independent variables, because you would have controlled for these other variables that you know can influence the outcome, but you are not really interested in them. So you need to think about where the data that you want to collect, where does it lie? So which target population has this data? Now that I know that I have these outcome variables, I have these independent variables that I want to measure, I have these control variables that I want to measure, where is this data located? So then that will assist you to say now the target population, because the target population should be that population that has these attributes that you want to measure. So you also have to identify that. Sometimes the target population, the nature of the topic also gives you a picture of the target population. Sometimes the topic doesn't capture the target population, and you would need to unpack it. And you also think about, once you've identified, you now have to think about, does this target population actually really possess all these attributes that I want to measure, or do I have to make modifications? So you must think also about your target population. And then so your target population, as you think about it, you also think about the concepts that you can explore. These concepts that you want to explore, are they, as I say, can you measure them from this target population? The type of questions you want to ask, can you measure them from this population? The words that you intend to use, or do you have to change your wording based on the target population? So as you think about the target population, you start to now think how you adjust what you have conceived to actually work for the target population, or you think about whether what you have conceived will work for this target population, or if you have to make modifications. As I say, for example, maybe you have to consider the wording that you will be using, taking into account the target population. Then you think about the methodology and the data collection method. Depending on what you want to study, you might find that if you send people questionnaires, it might not be appropriate it's better maybe for you to do the one-on-one interviews based on the nature of the subject that you want to study. So thinking about the target population also gives you now space for you to think about the data, the method that once I have I've compiled the questionnaire and having in mind what I really want to ask, can I use this method? Can I use an online method to collect this data? Or is this data such that I need to collect it one-on-one? If, for example, you are measuring things that you need to measure with equipment, then obviously it also now dictates to you that you can't collect this data online. You might have to go to your participants and actually do whatever, measure whatever you need to measure using the instrument. So as you think about, you can see that these things they are interrelated, and you need to think about them as you do your questionnaire so that you can take care of them. You don't do the questionnaire and at the end you see that no, it's not gonna work for this group. These questions, the way I've put them, the language I've used is not suitable. So as you do your questionnaire, you need to interrogate some of the other things that are interlinked to or that depend on this questionnaire so that you can make adjustments where you need to. Yes, so I spoke about the target population. Just to expand more. Am I still connected? Can you still hear me?
Yes, Princess, we can still hear you.
Okay,
Yes.
Connection. Thank you.
All right.
So just to expand more on the target population. So the questions I've mentioned that the questions have to be relevant and acceptable. And the target population, they need to be able to answer the questions accurately, meaning that because sometimes the target population can give you answers, but are those answers accurate? So you need to think about that, which means that the your participants or the target population, they need to have the same understanding about the questions that you'll be posing. As you think about the target population, you think about the language, as I've mentioned, that you'll think about which language is suitable. Let's say, for example, you've opted to use an existing instrument when you, as you will see, when I unpack kind of a structured approach you can follow. If you do decide, for example, to say, I'm going to use an existing questionnaire, is that questionnaire suitable in terms of the language in relation to the target population that you want to use it for? So you must also be aware, because now as what we are focusing on is that the population has to have the knowledge, the things that you want to measure. And it's possible that you are targeting a population, but they are ignorant about this topic. So for example, I remember this other time, I mean, now things have changed, but it must have been maybe 4 years ago. A researcher wanted to do a study on wearables. So the study was to look at whether how we could use wearables in the office. So at that time, I think it was not that much of a common a common idea that you can put you can use a wearable for different purposes. So if you do a study like that and you find that this target population, you want to do it maybe, for example, at the University of South Africa, and you want to see, for example, how administrators can efficiently use wearables in their functions, and you find that it's a topic that they are not familiar with. Maybe they are familiar with certain, but they are not aware of the different types that are out there that actually can be used in their function as in their administrative roles. So then they wouldn't be able to give you. They might, because sometimes people will just answer the questionnaire. So you send the questionnaire and the questionnaire will come back completed. But unfortunately, the people, they don't have the knowledge. They just responded based on what they assumed to be the truth. So this is a very important a point that we always need to consider when we work with questionnaires, as to whether these people and as to whether you are interested in, sometimes you want perceptions. Sometimes people can have perceptions about things that they haven't used, but they are aware of. So they have not used them, but they are aware of. So they can have a perception. But sometimes your study delves into, you really want the people to not just be aware, to be more than aware, such that when they respond based on knowledge. So you don't want them just to be aware, but you actually want them to have knowledge about that particular thing, not just a perception, but proper knowledge, as in they are knowledgeable about that subject. So there's always that thing that you must think as a researcher, that do I need people to actually have knowledge of this thing that I'm trying to measure, or is it okay even if they have perceptions, even if their perceptions can be off the mark? It's okay. So it depends on what you are trying to measure, and sometimes we do miss the mark, where your topic, you find that the people don't know, they're not exposed to, sometimes they're not exposed to about that topic, but you've identified them as your target population. So that's why it's important that as you think about what you want to ask, also think about the target population. And as I've said that sometimes even if participants are ignorant, they will still complete the questionnaire. So it's up to you as a researcher to make an assessment prior to actually circling on a particular target population, to say, will they be able to respond? Do they have knowledge about this thing that I want to measure? Yeah, so sometimes, as I say, they will just participate, but then what you are getting is not really accurate. And I suppose, like now, at these days, I'm always now conflicted with the online questionnaires, that sometimes when you ask about when you want to test knowledge, let's say you want to test knowledge, let's say you were doing an HIV study and you wanted to test knowledge about HIV. Ideally, you would kind of develop some questions which you will use to test knowledge. So it's like a test. You ask questions around HIV, which are like kind of test, as I said, the way you would do a test in a classroom to test if learners have knowledge about this thing that you've taught them. In this case, you haven't taught, but you want to measure if this group has knowledge. With this online questionnaires, I think now I struggle with the fact that because it's online questionnaires, your respondents can actually Google and read and then give you the right answer. For every question, they can check and then give you the right answer. So I think with this online approach, it has introduced that with some of the things that we want to measure, as I use the example of knowledge, that when you are doing an online survey, I don't know if you'd really say when once you have your responses, which you really attribute those responses that you are seeing to say that they have knowledge, or there are other things that are coming in, the fact that they can actually Google, as opposed to when you were giving the questionnaire and maybe you are giving it and you wait for it. So the people don't really have a chance to Google. So those are some of the things that you also have to think about when you are doing the questionnaire, especially now that we've moved online. When you are doing something about knowledge, think about the fact that your participants will be able to actually Google this thing that you are asking them about. So I don't know if there is any other way. Think about if there is any other way, and if there is no other way, be aware of that limitation and what it's introducing to your study. Yeah. And sometimes I also think about the questions that you are asking. Do they require your respondents to reflect on something that, you know, might have happened a long time ago, where there was there's a gap between when you are asking these questions and when what they need to reflect on happened. So they might not be able to accurately recollect, you know, what you are asking them to tap into. So that is also something to consider, that when you're looking at things that happen, look at the time lag and make an assessment of whether these respondents, you think that they can give you a true reflection, or if there is too much of a time that has lapsed. And as you take that into account, then you'll also decide on how you proceed, given that you're not sure if the time lag between now and what you want them to reflect on is too much, such that it can introduce inaccuracies, or maybe you'll have a lot of missing data where the people are not they can't remember, so they'll just skip those questions. So yeah, those are some of the issues, and some of these things, if you don't think about them, you'll only pick it up later when you do data analysis. You might not even pick it up, you might not even connect this missing data with this thing that you didn't take into account. You might just say it's missing data, whereas it's connected to what you were asking them about and the time lag. So these are some of the considerations that you need to think about, and also think about the target population. Is this target population the population that will be able to actually verbalize on their own, give you the responses, or do you need to have someone responding on their behalf? So maybe they can actually write what you are looking for, but maybe they're not able to verbalize it. But I suppose if you are doing an online, then they would be able to, there's no need for verbalizing. So these things, they affect, as I say, the modality. They are interlinked. That's why you need to consider them at the same time, so that as you move, you don't move not considering the mode, such that you've reached the end, and how you approach the questionnaire, the mode is not suitable to the approach, the angle that you took. Yeah, and then as you proceed, you draft the questionnaire, you draft the questions, as you take into account, as I say, these other factors that I've mentioned. And then you start with the questions which have been used, you know. So when you do your questionnaire, you first have to look at the variables that you want to measure. Have they been measured previously? That should be your starting point. Have they been measured previously? How have they been measured? And from what you are picking up from the literature, you start to pick up things that you consider that you can be applicable to your own study. You start to to filter, you know, what you are getting from the literature. You start to filter based on the target population to say, yes, this is measuring what I want to measure, but it's not going to work for my target population. But the starting point should always be what has been done. because what usually happens is the researchers, they look at what has been done with regards to the topic in general, but they don't zoom into the variables, which is very important for what you want to measure. You need to zoom into now. Yes, this is what have been done with this topic, but now with regards to these variables that I'm interested in, what has been done? And then you start to see, okay, there's an instrument that has been used, there's another one, and as I say, you filter until you get one that is suitable, or you adapt it, right? Or you have to add. Maybe it's not perfect, it only has one variable. And also with what has been done, you also have to be aware that you might not find, you mustn't expect to find all your variables sitting in one instrument, and you might find all the variables sitting in one instrument, but you might not like um how it has been measured. Maybe you like the entire instrument works, but there is a section that is not quite perfect for your target population. Then you can, for that section, then you can look at alternatives. So you mustn't just say, this is what I want to measure, and you take, because an instrument has all the variables. You must also go deep into those variables and see, will they work for me? And then you review, right, its feasibility, taking into account the things that I've mentioned, and you make modifications. And as you review the feasibility, it's now that you have the variables, you now see how these variables need to be measured and what they require. Let's say, for example, it's a study where people have to take measurements of something, then maybe you have to buy devices and send to your participants. And then you look at whether you'll be able to buy those devices for the and give them to your participants for the period of the data collection, such that they'll be able to measure themselves. And you must also actually show them how to use the device, or you're gonna send instructions. So you think about all those things. And as you will see, some things can be measured in more than one way. So when you think about feasibility, then you go for a method that will work for your study, given also the constraints and the resources that you have, and also your experience as a researcher. Sometimes maybe you don't have the budget to actually, maybe your study requires a professional to assist you, and you find that you don't have the money to pay a professional to assist you with certain measurements. Then as you think about the feasibility, then you go back to saying, how can I measure the same variables without using this device that require a professional? Or how can I measure it in such a way that I don't involve a professional? And if I cannot run away from a professional, what then now? Yeah, so those are some of the things you have to think about. And then as you review, you'll come to an end as you thresh out all the issues. And hopefully as you come to the end, parallel to that, you also have a data analysis plan. And then now you can talk about the structure, the format, the order, the flow, and to think about translation, whether it needs to be translated, the costs, whether you yourself have the skills to do the translation, or if you need to involve an expert. And then now you have something, and then you need to test it, right? To be able to pick up if there are things that you missed, if the questionnaire works, if it's easy, you can test it with, ideally, if it's a new questionnaire, you need to send it to experts, before you can test it with everyone, send it to experts in the field who will be able to see to what extent you've actually tapped on the domains that you want to measure. So you do need support in terms of experts, people in the field who can be able to talk about to what extent you are actually measuring what you need to measure. Because if you are measuring concepts, it's only people who are in that particular area who have knowledge about how this concept is measured, its depth, if it's got domains, and yeah, everything about the concepts that you want to measure. So it's important also to send your instruments to experts in the field, and you can review as required. So your problem and objectives, they have to be very clear, because once they are very clear, you'll be able to collect only what you need, and you are very focused with regards to why you are collecting the data, and you're not going to collect things that you are not going to use. And I think you can see that this requires you to actually read quite a lot, because yeah, if I suppose you are not really doing a proper literature review, but it does require that, because I've seen that with some of my previous consultations, the approach to the questions was not really thorough. So the researcher has to go back and read more about these variables that they are measuring, and go and see what has been done with regards to the variables. That's why I said that sometimes it happens that the researchers, when they read about the topic, but there is no specific focus on actually the reading being focused on the variables themselves, so that for each variable you can give an account of where this variable, what is the role of this variable in your study, and where do you locate it in the literature. And as we see it in the questionnaire, the way it is, where is this coming from? And why didn't you use the other approach? Why did you opt for this one? So you cannot make a decision and a choice. For you to make a choice, you need to be aware of what is available, right? What is out there. And for you to be able to know what is out there, it means you must have read and done a review. So all your variables, they require you to actually review what has been done on those variables, and how they are being measured, such that you now make a decision. You motivate to say, this is the angle, this is how I'm going to measure it for my study. And you are able to defend that, because sometimes the researchers, they will take a questionnaire, and then the question will be, why did you take, if let's say there are many questionnaires that are measuring work-life balance, why did you take this questionnaire and not the other questionnaire? Because sometimes the first questionnaire that you find, it's the one that you use. But then the question will be, why did you take this one as opposed to the other one? And while we are still at the existing questionnaire part, is you must also, as sometimes researchers, they will take the questionnaires from not articles, but maybe from theses and dissertations, right? Another student has done a study, and maybe sometimes it will be the supervisor's advice. The supervisor will say, we've done this study before with this angle. Your angle is slightly different, but the study, we did measure some of the things that you are measuring. Then you look into that thesis. As you look into the thesis, you also need to look, don't just look at the questionnaire. Also look at the section about the reliability. what kind of values were reported. So as you, especially the ones that are not thoroughly validated, as you are taking them from previous dissertation thesis and they have not been used quite a lot, you need to also look at the as I say, you need to look at the reliability as reported in the data analysis section, so that you can be able to see, because if they reported properly the reliability and the validity, you'll be able to pick up issues that were identified, such that when you use that instrument, you take into account what they reported. So if there were items that were problematic, you'll be able to take into account. You're not going to take it as is, and you also encounter the same issues, but you read the data analysis section such that you are able to pick up that there was a problem with this question, there was a problem with this question. Maybe you need to reword it, but you will be aware and you work around that. And this is also the same, even when you are using validated questionnaires, because maybe you find that the questionnaire was used in a different context, and there is someone else, maybe it's just a thesis, they adapted it, and you want to follow the same approach. You look at the reliability, and you because maybe they've used it in the same context as you, so you might find that the reliability that is reported by this the latest study is more close to what you want to do as opposed to what you are seeing in other articles. And then, as I say, you learn from the study. So what I'm actually highlighting is it's important when you use existing questionnaires to look at the section that reports the reliability and the validity. Don't just say this is a validated instrument, but also look at, when you look at articles that are using that study, look at the reliability and the validity, and especially the articles maybe that are close to where you want to apply that instrument. Yes. So with a questionnaire, it's also important to think about the sampling approach, the sampling size, and the response rate, because some data analysis techniques will require you to have a large sample. And when we estimate the sample for certain data analysis procedures, we look at the questions, the number of questions. One of the inputs that is used is the number of questions that you have. So that can be an input in estimating the sample size. So as you also try to balance that. As I say, if you are aware that once you have many variables, because of the data analysis technique that you need to use, once you have many variables, it puts pressure also on the sample. And if you are already pressured, sometimes you are aware of the population, right? You are aware that your population is a small population. So by nature, by definition, your population is very small. But now this questionnaire and the variables that you've identified that you want to measure, they require a big sample, but you can't get a big sample because your population is small. So maybe you might have to reduce the number of variables so that you strike a balance. So even the issue of the sample size and the approach, you also have to think about it. Not only think about it at the end, but think about it even as you are doing your questionnaire. And then the data collection, as I've said, you'll have to think about the modality and link it to the questionnaire. These questions, are they sensitive? What type of questions are they? Can people answer them online, or do you need to be there when they do the questionnaire? And then I'm just going to now proceed. Here, I'm only going to talk about structured questionnaires because those are the ones that are applicable when we're doing quantitative. So in terms of the focus of the workshop or the presentation, it's more focused on quantitative design, because that is our domain, and we don't really have much expertise on the qualitative side. So the angle is more on structured questionnaires, because these are the questionnaires that are appropriate when we want to quantify, and our quantitative studies about quantifying. We want to test hypotheses, and the data will be analyzed statistically. So we will have a structured questionnaires. So the characteristics will be the wording is structured, the questions are ordered, there's an order. So this is to ensure that the same, all the participants, they have the same stimuli. So you meet this question before you meet, and it's the same for the other respondent as well, that they see this question before they see. So it's structured so that even the approach is standard across, and the order is standard. People don't think about this and then about the next thing. If they're not structured, you'll think about this, and then the next, whereas the next participant, they start with this, which can affect how they respond. And the definitions are also structured, right? And the explanations, because we want the participants to have the same understanding. Because once the understanding is not the same, then it's not the same question. If I understand the question this way and Komoto understands it, it's the same question. If I understand it this way and Komoto understands it differently, it's no longer the same question. It's two questions, because our understand, when we are responding, we are not responding to the same question, since the understanding is not the same. So one of the thing with the definitions and how you put the questions is to ensure that the meaning of the questions is the same. If I receive it, I understand it the same way as the next person, and all of us, we understand it the same. We don't extrapolate and make our own meaning. And then the response format also is structured. So there is a structured way, as you see with your structured questionnaires. The response format is structured, and that it will assist with completion, and also that enables the variables to be quantified in a standardized way. That's why you would have a structured response format, such that we will not ask you, if we ask you to give us age in years, it's age in years for everyone. We don't find that it's just age, and the other one says, gives you a category, and the other one gives you age in years. So the structured format ensures that even in the quantification, there is a standard way that we are quantifying everything. So I'm gonna now move on to measurement, because their questionnaire is about measuring attributes, the attributes that we are interested in. So when we measure, we assign numbers or symbols to characteristics or attributes based on some rules. So here we also say symbols, because with structured questionnaires, the data that we collect, sometimes it's qualitative. As I will explain, you find that I'm collecting data about hair color. Hair color, it's a qualitative attribute. It's about type of your hair. So I can assign a symbol. I can say, if your hair color is brown, I will assign a code of A. If your hair color is yellow, I will assign B. So I can assign symbols, I can assign numbers. I think this then also makes you aware that whatever you are assigning, since you can assign numbers, and you can also assign symbols. What you are assigning, if you do assign numbers, it doesn't mean that hair color is 1 and you now must analyze the 1. You must analyze hair color. 1 is a symbol, it's a code that you've assigned. So in your analysis, you can't use that code such that you say, because 1 is brown, 2 is yellow, 3 is green, 4 is black, I can add them up and get an average since I've assigned these codes. No, these codes, I can replace them with A, B, C, D. Then what do? If I assign A, B, C, D, E, obviously I can't add A, B, C, D, E. So this, we should also show you that when you assign codes, numeric codes, it doesn't then mean that this variable that you've assigned codes to is now a number such that you can add up those codes and produce an average. No, you must still look at the variable as its types. So these types, I can't mix them up and get an average type. I can only say I have so many of this type, so many of this type, so many of this type. So with the things that we are measuring, the attributes, we have units, right? Which, for example, would be persons, animals. That's what we are interested in. So we're interested in attributes of this that are inherent in this, the units. So you can see with the example that it can be weight. It's a weight of a student, can be gender of a giraffe. We can have defects. The unit will be appliance. So there's quite a lot of things there that you can look at. Attribute can be GDP. A unit can be a country. So the unit, it can be different things. If your study is about countries, the unit can be a country. It doesn't necessarily have to be this low level as maybe most of the time we think about. Most of the time we think about persons. Unit can be a household. And for example, a unit can be a restaurant. So we need to think about it that way. For the other one that maybe you wouldn't think about, yeah, you can think about it, but it's just that most of the time, perhaps when we think units, we think people, we think low level. It can be a brand of juice. That can be a unit, and an attribute can be taste. So in terms of the variables that you are measuring, a variable would be, it captures attribute that describes a person, a place, a thing. We spoke about that previously, and it can vary. Sometimes it might not vary because if a variable, for example, is race, if you ask me, I will say I am black. If you ask Khomotso, Khomotso will also be black. But maybe other respondents, they will vary within. And we have dependent variable. I didn't explain it, but I've mentioned it. That is what you are interested in, the response variable, the outcome. It's primarily your interest. And you want to see how these other variables that we usually refer to as independent variables, how they influence or how they are related to this dependent variable. Yes, there are other studies that are descriptive, whereby you're not looking at relationships. You just want to describe things. But at most of the time, we are interested in inferences where we want to generalize things. We want to look at relationship between whether there is an effect of this, whether this influences that. Usually we are interested in those kind of analysis, whether things are correlated or there's an association, and you will have a variable that is of primary focus, and then you have other variables that you want to see how they influence this variable of interest that we say it's dependent variable, response variable, or outcome. So this outcome is not controlled by you as a researcher. You observe it. you observe it. But the independent variables, you can manipulate them. It's not always that you can manipulate them, but in some cases you can. For example, if your independent variable is gender, you can't manipulate gender. You can't say, I give you this gender, I give you that gender. So you can't manipulate gender. It's inherent in your units. But other variables you can manipulate. If, for example, I give you this amount of medication and I give another group a certain amount of medication. Me as a researcher now, I have a control as to who gets which amount. So I am manipulating the independent variable that is about the amount, the concentration of the medication. So I am in control as a researcher to say, I want to give this group this much, I want to give this group this much. And as I say, other variables, you can't manipulate them. And the response is what you'll be observing. As I give you this amount, how is your body responding with regards to blood pressure? If I give you this amount, how is your body responding with regards to blood pressure? But in this example, as a researcher, I can manipulate the independent variable. And I've also given the other example where you can manipulate the independent variable. So I'm going to move on to now a systematic way that you can use to approach your questionnaire. The questionnaire will start with the purpose, right? You are always guided by the purpose of the study. So once you've identified the purpose of the study, it has been circled with the supervisors that there is indeed a gap. You've done the underground work. And then now from the purpose, you're going to have your questions, your research questions. What do you want to, the specifics that you want to respond to in the study by doing the study. So the research questions will unpack the specific things that you want to tap into. This is what you want to know. And the research questions, they will be in an organized, a structured approach to decisions. So once you have the research questions, they will assist you to make decisions about the data to collect, which is now the questionnaire. What must I collect? So when you have the specific research questions, you take each research question and you unpack it. When you unpack the research question, it's going to inform you as to what do you need to collect. It might still be at a concept level that I need to collect data about stress. So that's what you are picking up from the specific research questions, that I need to collect data on stress. And you go to the next research question, you also unpack what needs to be collected for us to respond to the second one and the third one. If you are doing a mixed method approach, as you need to be clear with all the research questions that this one, I'm going to respond to it quantitatively. This one, qualitatively. This one, I'm going to use both approaches. So for each question, you need to be clear as to which approach you are going to use. If you are using a mixed method, which approach are you going to be using to respond to each? So if it's touching on both, then you need to account to say, for the quali, this is what I'm tapping into. For the quanti, this is what I'm tapping into. So you need to systematically look at the questions and give an account for each. Then once you know the data that you want to collect, now I go back to the quanti. That will now inform the type of data analysis. So I use this example that I used in the previous workshop. So for those of you who attended, this will be a refresher. So we start at the beginning. When you look at your research questions, from each research question, you need to highlight the concepts that are captured. You highlight the concepts that are captured by each research question. So if this example here, what is the level of knowledge of current affairs of UNISA students? So there is knowledge there. And this knowledge, there is level. Once there is level, you must know that when you report, you must report levels. Because you find that researchers, they will use level of compliance. They will talk about level of compliance. Because you are saying level of compliance, when we report, you must give us levels. We must see a picture of levels. So you find that in the question, there is level of compliance. But when we go to the questionnaire, the level is not taken into account. The question are just being asked. They're just being asked. And when you look at the questions and you ask, now that we've asked these questions, how do they give us the level? Because we want the level of compliance. So there must be, that's why you must look at each research question, the specifics. Look at it one by one. When it says level, your mind must know my questionnaire, when in terms of level of compliance, I need to be able to say, how am I going to use these questions to get to the level? Because I spoke about level of compliance. Then you talk about current affairs. It's a concept. You will say now, what does this concept current affair mean? And how can I measure it? That's where you go to your literature review to say, how has it been measured? And which measurement can I adopt? And then also students at UNISA, you have to now say, am I talking about the entire UNISA students, or am I actually talking about undergraduate or postgraduate students? Was I supposed to maybe say postgraduate students, or should I say students at UNISA or undergraduate? So you even interrogate, because this talks about your target, right? It talks about your target. And then you have age. As another question, you say you want to look at age. We've spoken about knowledge and current affair. So even this age, you think about it as well, and you look at literature to say, in the context of my study, age, how is it being used? How is it being measured? If it's measured categorically, what are the categories that are being used? But maybe for my study, I don't want to use these categories, because my study has, in terms of age, has a special focus on, maybe I want to talk about young people and those who are not young. And you will find that if you don't think about these things as to, okay, here is age, here is a previous questionnaire, this is the category, and you just take the categories that were used, you don't think about the fact that in your study, you want to talk about, for example, young people. You want to have a focus on young people and those that are not young. So you want those two groups. You find that if we use the South African definition, I think it's up until 35 years. And you find that the questionnaires, the questionnaires where you took the age, they have something that ends at 40, and then 41 to something, but you wanted 35 and then 36. So if you find that you have a questionnaire that does 5-year gaps, it might still work even if you didn't think about it thoroughly. It might just work for you, but you find that they did the 10-year gaps such that your 35 is inside, and it's mixed, because it's now maybe 30 to 40. So you have the 36, the 37, the 38, the 40. You end up maybe having to modify for your study and say, for my study, when I talk about young, I will talk about 40, because when you put the variable age in your questionnaire, you didn't think about in the context of your study. So yes, things have been done. You can say this has been used, but you must always bring it back to your study to say, okay, this is the categorization. Does it work for my study? Because I want to, my literature maybe talks about this, but my study also has a special focus on young people versus those who are not young. Then it means my categorization must work. So you must always, whatever has been done, you must bring it back to your study, your context. If, for example, a variable like age, it's at least one of those variables where if you are not really sure how you want to use it, you know from literature that it's related to the outcome, but you're not really sure how you want to group it. You can ask it as age in years. And during data analysis, you would have read more than you have read at that point, because as the study continues, you'll be doing more literature review. And as you do the literature review, you'll get ideas on how you really want to use it. And then at least age is one of those variables that you can safely put it as age in years. And at data analysis, you can group it based on what you are picking up from the literature. So that's important. And then here, these are other variables which are like field, level of study, and that. And then this brings us, so these are concepts. So as I say, you identify the concepts. From your research questions, you identify the concepts that are coming out. Those are the concepts that you need to, you list them. And if from every question you've listed the concepts, you've covered the things that need to be measured. I mean, if you look at the first one, if we take level of knowledge, we take into account you are interested in knowledge, but level, there's current affairs, and then we've also taken into account the target population. So I've covered the question. If I report on level of knowledge of current affairs, I've covered the question. And I've reported for the right target population. I've covered the question. Second one, if I take into account, if I'm measuring age, knowledge I've already measured, I've covered the second question. And then if in the third one, I look at the key concepts here, field of study, it means I must measure field of study. Level of study, I must measure it. This other one I've already looked at previously. So that takes us to the point that, so these variables, you have the conceptual definition, and you have the operational. So the conceptual is just how the what we perceive to be the concept. If we talk about age, it's what age is, age, but then operationally talks about how you will measure it. So the conceptual is about the abstract meaning of that concept or the theoretical meaning of that concept. But you need to move now from the conceptual, that is age. You move to how you are going to measure it. I have a variable called age. How am I going to measure it? Then that will be the operational definition for your study. That says to you that it can be operationalized in many ways. Some you can only measure it in one way. For example, if you have what? If you have eye color, I suppose there's a limited range of colors, right? I don't know if they can be subdivided, if they are broader categories. If there are broader categories, then obviously the concept of operationalizing it comes into play. But if eye color can only be measured in one way, it can only be measured in one way. So the conceptual and the operational definition, they will be the same. But there's quite a lot of cases whereby the concept can be measured in more than one way. Then you select what will work for your study. That's what will be the operational definition for your study. So as you think about the operational definition, you think about, you have things that can be self-reported, because we are talking about questionnaires where respondents, it's based on their thoughts, their feelings, like self-esteem. I'm not gonna open it, but yeah, it's based on how I feel. And then we have some measures that are based on a behavior that is observed. So let's say, for example, uh, you will see with this example that we are using, if, for example, I want to observe how you sit when you are working on your desktop. I want to actually observe how you sit. Then I'll have to come to your office, wherever you are working, and actually observe. Obviously, the assumption is I'm an expert in ergonomics, and I'll be able to see whether you are slouching, whether you are sitting upright, where you put your hands most of the time. Do you put them on the desk? Are they on the when you type? Where do you put, yeah, what posture do you take? So I'm able to observe. And other things are observed like in a structured environment where maybe we take you to a lab. I'm sure there is this other question. There's this other show, I can't remember on which channel, but it's about children. So they will take children and they will observe them. So they'll have a number of children and they will observe them, how they behave, how they respond when because they will be, as they engage with other kids. So they are in a controlled environment and they are being observed as to when they are angry, when they don't agree with other kids, how do they behave? Are they aggressive? Are they timid? So that would be a controlled environment. So we do have those kind of measures where you need to um, observe and you will be taking down. So in that case, you'd still have to, because this is, I think it's also an important thing to raise here, because you do find that in the proposal, the researcher will say, I'm going to do observations, but they don't say what are the variables as you are observing, what are the variables that you are recording. So it might not look like maybe a questionnaire per se, but you need to say, because my study is about anger, or my study is about what confidence. If I go back to the context of these children, my study is about, I'm looking for this word that is not being assertive. Yes. So maybe you want to see these kids, whether they're assertive, they're timid, how they respond when they're with their peers. So you need to, it needs to be written as well to say, yes, I will be measuring assertive. And I picked it up from my research questions. And you have to say, in terms of assertiveness, what exactly will you be recording, right? Based on the literature. So even when you are doing an observation, you need to have your variables written and outlined. It's not kind of a questionnaire per se, but you are collecting data. It's a data collection instrument. So you need to list the variables and you need to research these variables to say, how are they measured? For my study, how, even if I'm going to be doing in a controlled observations, what am I going to record exactly? And theoretically, where is this coming from? This measurement that I'm thinking of following. So yes, and then we also have physiological measures where sometimes the measures will be done through a device, maybe your blood pressure, your heart rate. And I'd like to believe even with these ones, I suppose they can also have different spins to them. So even with this one, you need to be very clear to say, when I say blood pressure, what exactly will I be measuring? And everything is very clear and specific. So I'm moving now to the example, the definition I've explained. So I'm going to use the example of knowledge about current affairs, right? This is what we are using. I'm going to pick it up on here to say, now that I have these questions, the other ones, they are more straightforward in terms of the field of study. You'll decide whether you're going to give them all the fields or you're going to group the fields. So you'll also make a decision on that level of study. You'll say whether it's first year, second year, depending on the target population that you ended up circling on. So if it's the entire UNISA student population, then you'll have all the different levels. If it's postgraduate students, then you will have only the levels applicable to postgraduate students. And then if it's age, you will decide, I've covered age, to say whether you're gonna collect age in years or you're gonna collect, you already know that you want to look at young people and those who are not young. Therefore, it means you're gonna have two groups in terms of age. So that's how you will operationalize it. You'll have two groups. One group is those who are young. The other group is those who are not young. And then coming to knowledge about current affairs, you also look at it. Knowledge about current affairs, you look at whether, how is knowledge about current affairs measured? You go to your literature to check the options, how knowledge. Sometimes you already know how you want to measure it because perhaps you are already exposed to that field. So you're already aware of the different options and you already know the one that you want to take. So your knowledge, you bring in your knowledge as long as you can account for the approach that you are taking. That's the most important thing. You need to be able to defend, to say, I'm using this approach because of XYZ. And so the three options that I've put there, that you can ask factual knowledge questions, right? And this one is the one where I have that dilemma that I raised about when you're doing HIV. Now that most studies are done online, if you want to ask about knowledge about current affairs, would you be able to get the correct information, since your respondents might be able to Google? So maybe you might end up having to, for example, because maybe you still want to investigate this subject of current affairs and students. So because that seems to be maybe something about students and current affairs. So maybe you might have, for example, to change the target population. So maybe target what do we call this institution? Your traditional institutions where you have students on campus and you distribute your questionnaire. So you distribute, they complete, you take it like that, such that they don't have a chance to actually search what they write. What you get is a true reflection of their knowledge. So you see, when you are aware about these things, you can also maybe change your study. Even if when you conceived it, you had, but you might still find that you can change the population because maybe your interest is more on, as I say, for example, young people and those who are not young. And you are looking at, but then when you change the institution, you also have now another dilemma. But you, at least now you are interrogating your study. The other dilemma could be that in your traditional universities, you have to now ask yourself if you're going to find a lot of students who are on campus, meaning not necessarily they are always on campus, but who are full-time, who are not young. Will you be able to have access to that group, or is that group not accessible on campus, such that changing you see, so you also now have to make a determination to say, yeah, 10% of the students who you start to look at now the reports to see in terms of the profile of the students for the different institutions, what is the profile, and you can be able to see that, yes, I'll have enough sample because they have about 550 students who are above, who are not young, who are full-time on campus. Some are still doing undergraduate qualifications. So you see that you are interrogating. As you say, you want to do factual. You also now thinking about, when I'm doing factual, I want to do it online. Will it work? If it doesn't work, can I? Can I? So you see that you are able to take into account all these things that are related, that are connected to your approach to the measurement that you select, such that it doesn't hit you at the end. And then, as I say, the second option could be, for example, to look at news consumption, right? That can be a proxy. And so it can be a proxy to say that I will just ask them how much they consume. So if they read the newspaper or they read the online news every day, twice a week, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, like that. So that would be the frequency. That's if you are using the frequency. And you can also ask them how they perceive themselves, right? Do they consider themselves to have the level of knowledge? If they were to rate themselves, do they consider them to be average, to have a very good, excellent? So that would be how they perceive themselves. So even with that measurement, you are aware that if I go with how they perceive themselves, it's not really true. It's just how they perceive themselves. And it might be enough for your study. It might be enough for your study, and you can motivate that. For me, it's not really important that I really want the knowledge. And you can maybe change your research questions to actually talk to this perceived knowledge. So it's not the actual level of knowledge. You haven't measured it. Then you can talk about their perceived level. So here, where you come back here, you will not be saying what is the level of knowledge. If you take that last approach, you'll be see the perceived. It's really what they perceive. So you will change the question and you are happy with it. That's what you'll focus on. And as I say, yeah, so you'll have to come back and change. And everywhere else, it's not really knowledge, it's the perceived level. Yes, and then I've covered this. And then, so with this example, you can have the aging generations where you have the millennials, you have the baby boomers. So that's maybe how you want to operationalize your age variable. And you are very clear from the beginning that this is how I want to use my variable. I want to talk about the different generations in my writing, because my literature, when it talks about age, it looks at it in that particular way. So for me to be able to compare my results with the results of previous studies, I'm gonna look at it in that way. And sometimes maybe most of the literature doesn't look at it in that way, but you want to look at it in that way. And then you are aware that you are deviating in your field. Age has not been explored in relation to knowledge of current affairs in the form of generations. And you also are aware that in your discussion, there is not quite a lot that you can refer to, but you'll be taking, things that are close to these generations. But yeah, So, but you, as you see, is you are also aware of how your choice, your decision at this point will affect you going forward. And I think maybe for those who didn't attend, we can look at this. We can look at the other example, which is this example of poverty. So the question is, how do you identify the poor? How do you say someone is poor? So someone can be poor based on how they perceive themselves. So you can also take that approach where you more focused on how they perceive themselves. So even your research questions and even your topic has to it has to bring that out, that it's a perceived thing. It's not the actual. Once you want to talk about the actual, then you move away from that measurement that is based on how they perceive themselves, but you now tap into other measurements that are being used to measure whether someone is poor or not. So, for example, whether you use the poverty lines, these are the South African reference things. These are the it's in relation to the South African. It might be a little bit dated, but you can have a food poverty line. So, if for your study you might decide that I want to use the food poverty line, which is now based just on money that you need for daily energy intake. So it's based just on food. This poverty line, it's derived based on food only. So maybe that's what you want to use. And then you'll have the poor and those who are not poor based on the food poverty line. And you can see, even if you are using poverty lines, you have options as well. You can have the other one, which is the lower bound, that takes into account also non-food items. So the first one, it's more about poverty with regards to just food. Are you able to survive based on the minimum that you need food-wise? And maybe you want that approach. So being aware of what is out there and interrogating it, then you're able to decide, will it work for me? Will it not work for me? And within the South African context as well, if you want to say, how do we identify the poor? You can also use this index as well. Obviously, I mean, as you read about these things, you also pick up the advantages, the disadvantages as you are reading about them, and you are able to locate yourself and see what will work, what you can live with, what you can't live with, and you find something that will work for you. So with this one, it's an index. So it means it's got dimensions, and it taps on different dimensions. So this one, whereas this one, it's not really, it's a category. You see this one, you are poor based on the poverty life, or you are not poor, or you use the other bounds. Here, the poverty is the index is computed based on what? Health, education, living standards, and economic activity. So different dimensions are looked into. And maybe that's what you want for your study. You want a measurement that taps into these things. Maybe you also wanted other things which are not here, but this is the closest, something that is close. The closest thing to your study is this one. When you look at this one, it doesn't tap into what you want to tap into when you talk about poverty. But maybe you look at this one, you see that, yes, this one, it looks at different dimensions, and that's really how I want to look at poverty. And because you are aware, you may be able to select this measure, and you are able to see how the different domains, they don't have the same weight, and they have different indicators, right? If you just look at health, they use child mortality. And the other thing is, as you look at these tools, for example, with this one, in the context of poverty, you can see this one, it's at a household level. So this is at a household level. At the end, the index, the score that is being computed is computed for what? For the household. Even that, you need to see that as you interrogate this existing instrument, so that you are aware that if you use it, this is where it's going to take you. And this principle is applicable also to other existing instruments. You need to know, I want to measure this, what has been done. If I select this instrument, how am I going to use it? Very important. You don't collect data and then ask yourself after, because we find that quite a lot, that you've decided that you want to use this instrument, you were able to get the questions, but now this is data analysis. We ask you, you've got 30 questions on poverty. What must we do with them? Because clearly I can't just say, you can see here, there are weights. So we can't assume that you just add what they said and we divide by, you understand what I'm saying? I hope you get what I'm trying to say that you need to be clear when you are doing your questionnaire that if I take this, how am I going to use it at data analysis? Don't leave it at data analysis stage, because you find that as you go through articles, you are struggling to find, because some articles, they don't give all the information. They will say this is what we used, but they don't go into specifics to say add this has a weight, this, that, they don't weigh the same. Those things, they need to be thought about at the beginning. I'm gonna conclude this and then we can have a break. So yeah, if I just scroll to the end for you to get the bigger picture, you can see standard of living. It takes it into account that to have access to water, sanitation, the type of dwelling, whether it's a shack, a traditional dwelling, a caravan, a tent. It talks about assets. Then they will use things like a radio, a television, a refrigerator, a car. And then they will have a way of using all this. You can see each indicator has a weight. Then there's also economic activity, which weighs 25%. So we're talking about poverty, but it's not really based on unemployment, but it's based also on other dimensions. Yes, we were here. Yes, so yeah, I've covered this. So we can just do an example before we go on a break. So this is just a scenario that you want to, maybe you want to look at the impact of stress on academic performance of undergraduate university students. So that is the purpose. You want to look at the impact of stress. So maybe there are some reports that you have access to, you are picking up that there is students presenting themselves with stress symptoms, maybe at the clinic. The stats are showing that students are presenting themselves, a lot of students are presenting themselves with symptoms of stress, and you want to investigate. Now you want to look at stress, but you now also want to look at how it's affecting academic performance, right? So that could be the purpose. Then one thing could be could be you want to look at the level of stress. So it's level again. So when you report, we must see level in your reporting. And then we have undergraduate students. Maybe you want to determine, you don't just want to limit now to look at academic performance, but you want to look at the determinants, to say you want to look at the factors that are contributing. So that would be another specific objective. And then maybe you have a specific, this one, yes, is the relationship. The first one is just the level, to report on the level of stress. and the other one is about relationship. So as you look at this, you must think, how am I going to measure? I hope you can see. Let me come back. You must now ask yourself, I have level of stress, I've highlighted it. How am I going to measure it? And then you go into your literature to pick up what literature is saying about factors that could be contributing, and you'll pick them up from literature. And maybe there are others that you know as an expert in the field that maybe you've observed, you also want to test. So those will come. And then there is academic performance. You have to think, how am I going to measure academic performance? Is academic performance progression to the next level? Is academic performance passing 50%? So you'll also have to define what is performance for the study, how will it be measured? So this should be the approach that you take. You are clear on this is how I'm going to measure it, and then you will take it now to the questionnaire. So for example, if you have something like this, for example, maybe academic performance, the nature of your study, you need to take academic performance because you want the actual academic performance. You're going to get it maybe from administrative data for the people that you will sample. So you'll get it from administrative data. And then the questionnaire, you will send it so that you can get these other variables, like you can measure stress level, you can measure the determinants. So you can see when you unpack, you are also able to see that some of the things you cannot get them through a single source, as in giving a questionnaire. You could, I mean, I've had people who have done that where they didn't get the actual performance from the academic records, meaning that you get the data from the university, you get permission, but they will have a questionnaire. In the questionnaire, they will ask the students how they performed. So you can see also that one has limitations, right? Because you are asking the students how they performed. It's a self-reporting. Students can say they did well, even if they didn't do well. They can just rate themselves anyhow. So the accuracy of that variable is really questionable. And you need to now apply your mind to say, if I take that route, where does it take me? But if we just look at, we wanted the actual impact, it means then we need to actually measure academic performance. And the thing that can give us a true measure of academic performance will be the student records. And from the student records, we can derive our measure. If we say you must have passed 50%, then we will look at your records and compute and derive the variables. So even when we get the data, the secondary data, it doesn't mean that it comes ready. It's giving you the academic record per year. And you now have to take that and compute your variable academic performance to say whether, if you're going to do it as a yes or no, pass, fail, or they did well, they didn't do well, based on the criteria that you are applying. Yes. And then for the stress, you are aware that there are different ways you could approach stress. You could look at physical signs, as I've put them there, the things that a person can experience as a result of stress. It doesn't mean that if you experience this, it's due to stress, but these are some of the physical signs. And then you also have mental, emotional signs. So you have to decide as to what do you want to tap into. Do you want to tap into both? Or are you only going to tap into the physical signs, or just the mental or emotional? So you are aware and you now make a decision. So the questionnaire will be informed by this decision that you take here. And you can also have a subjective measure here where you ask them to rate themselves. So they can rate themselves from 0 to 10. There could be other ratings, but it's also a subjective. They have to look at themselves, and sometimes the thing with this subjective one is sometimes, yes, people will give you the wrong answer, something that's not accurate, because they don't know. They're not aware of the symptoms. They're not aware that these symptoms they've been experiencing is because of stress. So it's not that they are giving you wrong information. They're not aware. So maybe they will say, when they say they will say they haven't experienced stress, but whereas in reality they've had the symptoms of stress. So yeah, those are the limitations. And then, I mean, at the end, you make a decision and you go with what will work for your study. And then I'm going to close with this one before we take a break, and then we'll move into the insight, the things to consider now when you've decided what you want to measure. As you now populate it now, what are the things that you need to take into account? So it's another scenario where there's a Department of Human HR at UNISA. They are observing an increase in absenteeism since remote working was introduced. So that's what you are observing, a trend is emerging. And you now decide to do a study to investigate what could be the causes of this. So you look at, so this I'm just bringing them out. You can think about physical issues that could be because of the setup. Because myself, I'm working from home. I could be sitting in a restaurant now as I'm doing this workshop, right? I could be sitting outside in front of a very nice garden that is very stimulating. I could be sitting, lying down on the carpet or on the couch. So you can imagine that working from home, our workstations are different. And because of that, that can introduce this disorder, musculoskeletal disorder, where your posture can now, because you are using things that were not designed for working, you find that now your back is strained, your neck. So there are all these physical things that are being introduced because of the work environment. Things about the number of hours worked per day. You can think about those variables. You can think about emotional, psychological, the fact that you are working from home, you don't interact with colleagues, you don't share ideas, also the work-life balance. So absenteeism, you have it. This one is similar to the other one as well, that absenteeism, you have it in your HR records. And then there are these other variables. So with this one, you have to think about this. When you think about this study, you must think about this. This has to come to mind. Now, the questionnaire, the approach, you have to think about this now, that we are all working, but all of us are not, our stations are not the same. So you think about whether, are you gonna ask these people to send you pictures of their working station and themselves working, and how many will give you the real one? How many, who is going to take a picture and send this picture of them lying in bed? So and maybe if, for example, the company has said we will be working from home, like it's a permanent arrangement, maybe the respondents might actually give you a true reflection of their current situation, because the organization actually wants to put measures in place to say, for example, they will assess your workstation to see if the chair is proper. So for those who have things, so maybe they will have to send people to go and do assessments and check your chair. For those who are working, who have like these two, they have a working station, proper working station, but we still need to look at the quality of the chair, right? Is it suitable? As you see, the one on the left and on the right, yes, they have workstations, but you can see the chairs are not the same. So maybe the company wants to compensate those who actually have the right equipment, they will be compensated. And those who don't have, they will be given a chair, a desk, the right things. So, but then you first have to measure what is really happening. And as I say with this one, it's one of those dicey ones to say, I mean, if they say take pictures, will I take a picture of myself in bed? Will I ask someone to take a picture of myself and send it to the office to say, this is how I usually work? It depends on how open, the environment is. You feel that you won't be judged or victimized. It will just be seen that you are productive. Your line manager knows that you are productive. So you are comfortable to send this picture of you working from your bed because your productivity is not questionable. So there are all those issues. So when you decide on an approach, you have to take into account these limitations. Yeah, I'm gonna pause here. Welcome back. Yes, so this is where we ended, where we were just looking at just some of the things that you just need to think about what you want to measure, and just think about the different environments that can influence what you're trying to measure, so that you can, when you make a decision, we see the example that I'm using here. I mean, to actually measure because the study would be looking at we spoke about the physical, so maybe they need to go and take measurements of the blood pressure, the different physical measurements they can do. And then the other aspect to the study would be to look at now your workstation so that they can be able to see your posture, those things that I've highlighted. And in the context of this, you'd now have to think about whether people would actually present their real workstations, or if you're going to send someone, since you want a specialist someone who's a specialist in ergonomics, someone who will be able to actually, as they observe you working, they're able to take note of the right things, whether the people would prepare. Obviously I wouldn't go and buy a chair. I might maybe just take a chair and maybe put a table. It might not be perfect, but maybe I don't really want to someone to come in and find me working from my bed. So those issues, as you think about them, you're also able to see where to pitch your study and how to approach it. But if you don't interrogate the things that you want to measure, and really interrogate them extensively and where they are located, you actually find that what you decide on maybe doesn't really work. Yes, you are measuring things related to ergonomics. You are looking at, you have a questionnaire on well-being, something that is looking at, that taps into whether they are lonely, they are satisfied, but it didn't take into account the fact that these people maybe might not present, or they might. So maybe even in your introduction, you might have to say certain things in the introduction to put people at ease, to say that this information will be used for this, that, and maybe that will encourage your respondents to actually bring out a more true reflection of their current. This is now I'm looking at the workstation environment where they will actually feel comfortable to actually present how they work on a daily basis. If they work from their bed, that's what they would want to present because maybe you've put them at ease. But if you are not, you don't take into account these things, you actually miss small things that can enhance your study and ensure that your participants give you what you need. So we're going to continue. This, I think we've covered in the previous workshop, but here what I want to say, I'm not going to go into details. What I want to say is it's important that even now as you decide on the concepts and how you're going to measure them in the study, you need to now be able to identify the type, the measurement type. So as you decide this is the scale that I'm going to use, I'm going to take the poverty line approach to measure poverty. Then you also say it means that my outcome is going to be binary because poverty, the way I'm going to measure it as using the food poverty line. Those who are below, they will get a 0. Those who are above, they will be assigned 1. But I only have 2 possibilities. So you are aware that your outcome will be a category, and it's going to be a category that has 2 levels. So that is also important because that then says that you are able to, when you think about data analysis, think about the right statistical test. Since you are aware that your outcome is binary, when you read, you will now be looking for statistical tests that are talking to binary outcomes. And in that way, what you propose, as I say, for data analysis will also be aligned with the measure that you settle for. So here, what I want to bring out is that it's important to also, as you now decide on your variables, to also identify the type and also note it, write it somewhere so that you can be able to use that information to think about the statistical tests. So that's all I want to say there. So I'm now going to move on into now the things that you really need to, and now you've settled on the variables. Maybe you are using an existing questionnaire and you are now going to go through it and check for certain things. So these are some of the things that you need to be on the lookout for. Or you are developing or you are adapting, whatever. But now you are looking at your questions. These are the things to take into account. So you will have, with, as I've said, we're talking about a structured questionnaire because we are talking about quantitative data. That's what we want to collect. And you might still have some open-ended questions, even though your study is really quantitative. So maybe you do have some open-ended questions where people are able to explain things or elaborate. And then you have your close-ended questions where they just select what has been provided. So with the close-ended questions, the participants, they give specific limited alternative responses. So they are limited to the response options that you give them. So if you don't give them a response option, unless you put it under other, they're not able to select it. So they can only select based on what you've made available to them. And then the open-ended, the respondents, they are free to answer based on their thinking. So they can just articulate their thoughts with regards to what you are asking in their own words. So they are not restricted. So in terms of the advantages, obviously the close-ended, it may restrict the depth of participant. So maybe they want to say more, but they can't because they can only tick. And also, if you didn't give them, for example, a response option that is suitable to them, if you didn't think about it, then they're not able to provide an accurate reflection of their position with regards to the question that you asked. So that would be the disadvantage, that they're limited to what you are providing. And the other disadvantage is that it also already gives your respondents ideas, right? Because they can read what you've put across. So already you are giving them ideas, even if maybe they hadn't thought about something, but because you've put it there, they might. But if you had asked them, maybe they wouldn't have touched on that angle. But because you've put it there, so you're giving them ideas. And the advantage is obviously it's that there is less work for the interviewer, less time to answer, but you can compare because the questions are asked the same way, the same response options are given to all the respondents, so you can compare. And as we've said, you can actually compute standardized measures such that you can compare. Then the open-ended, yes, you are free to write in your own words, but sometimes maybe the participants might struggle to say, how do I put it across? Which word can I use for this? So they have to think about how to put that thing across. And they may be difficult to analyze, but I suppose it's just a question of the skill. They do require time because people have to be writing, and perhaps difficult to compare. But the advantage is that it gives the participant room to actually express what they want to express. And they can also provide a context, with regards to what you are asking them about. So in terms of the close-ended questions, because mostly our quantitative data is in the form of the close-ended questions, the open-ended questions will just be maybe an addition there. You need to ensure that the choices that you are giving them are mutually exclusive. So the response options, they have to be mutually exclusive. So if you are measuring religion, for example, and you ask on the left, which religion do you belong to? And you give them these three options. The three options are not inclusive of everything. No, the three options, they actually overlap because you've got Christian, non-Christian, and Muslim. Non-Christian, Muslim will be part of non-Christian. So if I'm Muslim, I wouldn't know now, should I select non-Christian or the other one? So there's an overlap, as you can see. So you need to ensure that the categories don't overlap. The response options don't overlap, but they are mutually exclusive. So someone can only belong in one category. It shouldn't be that they can belong in more than one group. So you can see on the right-hand side, those are the possible ways you can correct that, whether you go Christian, non-Christian, or you go Christian and you add all the other groups that are there, that are common in that particular population, and you can also have other. So the other example, which this one, it happens quite a lot. You would think that it doesn't happen, but it happens quite a lot, this one of age, where the categories, they overlap. Sometimes researchers, they don't see that. Maybe they just took the question from somewhere and they plug it in and they don't interrogate it. And when we come, if maybe your questionnaire is not reviewed during data analysis, we end up with this, where we have under 18, 18 to 24. If you are 24, you don't know what to tick. Do you tick 18 to 24 or 24 to 34? You don't know. So these are some of the things that you need to be on the lookout for. And then also ensure that the choices are exhaustive. So you must, as much as they are mutually exclusive, they must be exhaustive. So you must give people all the possible response options. So you shouldn't just have a narrow approach. So it means this requires you to have knowledge about that variable. so that the categories that you put in the questionnaire, they are exhaustive. You've thought about all the possible options. So for example, the incorrect way here is you are only giving them 3 options, whereas maybe you don't know, but within your population, there are other groups, there are other religion types, and you didn't put it in the questionnaire. And those people, what are they supposed to tick? They will just leave it blank. And you will not know whether it's blank because they didn't want to provide the answer, or it's blank because you didn't accommodate them. So you're not going to know. So the correct way is to have all the possible types. And then you can also have other. And then you can allow them to specify if other. So in terms of, I'm going to continue. These are the question types that we are looking at. So in terms of that, we are looking at, there has to be mutually exclusive, and they have to be exhaustive. But then in terms of the different types, you can have different types of questions that you put in the questionnaire. You can have binary, where it's yes or no. So the yes or no, you can use it when people are ticking, maybe they must select what is applicable to them. You can use yes or no, or you can use they tick all applicable. So if you have yes, no, is this, so you've got a list of things, so they tick yes when that thing is applicable to them. And you can also use yes, no when you are measuring not perceptions, things that that have occurred, kind of, but not that are perceptions that are not fluid, They are either true or not true. You can have the yes or no. And then you can have more than 2 options, where you have now determinant choice questions, where they're choosing from more than 2. With the first one, you only have 2 options, but with the second one, they can have more than 2. For example, preferred cell phone network. So the list will be there will be a list, and they can select what they prefer. So even with this one, it's one of those, you have to use the words properly. Whether, if you are talking about cell phone network, you need to talk about, if you want them to select one thing, you need to have the word preferred. And if you don't want them to select more than one thing, then you can give them a list, and they can select the ones they prefer the most. Some might prefer everything that you have put, but not everyone will prefer everything. Sometimes maybe you can ask them to rank. Yeah. And then we have other questions which are about frequency determination, where we want to know the frequency at which maybe a certain behavior or activity occurs. So most of the time they will use your never, once, twice. You can see that I'm using once, twice, 3 times, more than 3 times. I'm not using never, often, usually, because those ones are not clear. Usually for me might mean 3 times a week. For you, usually might mean 4 times a week. Sometimes you don't know what's the difference between often and sometimes. So when they give you those response options, you don't really know what's the difference between often and sometimes. So you need to try and avoid that. But here, the essence of here is we have questions which are about frequency. And with those questions, you need to have a reference point. So you see in the past month, that is very important, so that your respondents, when they respond, they are all reflecting about the same period. You don't find that others are talking, when they reflect on it, they talk about, they think about the year. Others, they think, no, about last week. Others think about the past month, because you didn't provide them a reference point to reflect on. So they are all applying their minds and using different points of reference. And then we also have rating Likert scales, which are more about perceptions and attitudes. And then we also have multiple response questions. So with the multiple response questions, those are the questions whereby the respondents are allowed to select more than one thing. They select all that is applicable. So now I'm going to move on to the wording, the questionnaire wording. In terms of the wording, what you need to be on the lookout for. So you need to ensure that the words that are being used, each question is measuring the underlying concept, and that you will account for by being able to go back and account for that question through the literature that you've done to say, this is where I got this question, and it's tapping onto the concept because according to this person. You don't have to be writing those things, but I say you can have those references next to the questions because it's going to help you. Once you put those references, you will always know where you got why you asked the question in that way. And you can have the references for each question, especially the things that can be measured in more than one way. You can, next to each question, have a reference to say, this is the approach that I took. I took the approach of this author. And each time you look at the question, you're not confused. You know where you got it. And if you need to go back and read, you can go back and read. And yeah, you need to ensure you look at the word. It doesn't measure other concepts because it's one question. One question must measure one thing. As you will see, if one question is measuring more than one thing, then you are confusing your respondents because they can only provide one answer, but you are asking them to reflect on two things. So when they are responding, what are they responding about? And very important that these words, these questions, the words that you are using in your phrasing of the question, they must have the same meaning. This is important. Have the same meaning for all respondents. And as you saw in the example, you must provide reference frames. So if you are talking about frequency, you provide the time. Sometimes the frames have to be about a place so that when they think, they don't think generically or overall. If you want them to give an overall, maybe you have to use those words. But if you want them to be specific to to apply their thinking to certain locations, then you must put that in the question. So if you look at the example here, that how often do you feel anxious? So this one, it doesn't have a point of reference to say, is it in the past week? Should I talk about my entire life if I reflect on my life, or the past year? Because you didn't provide a reference point, your participants, others, they will be thinking, I haven't felt anxious in the past 2 months, but maybe they are generally anxious, they have anxiety issues, but maybe in the previous 2 months, they haven't experienced that. The other person will think about their entire life and say, when they reflect, their response is based on their entire life. So you see that where they are referring to, it's different time points which can influence their response. As I say, you might find a person who generally has anxiety problems, but they have not experienced them in the past month or in the past week. And then they will say, they'll give it a different response to if they had reflected on the month. So even these time points, you are the one who are supposed to decide on them. You follow your literature. You'll have to also have a motivation as to why you are looking at a month, not a week, and so on. And the example you can see also, if I say, what is the status of the economy? It's very generic. But now, if I want to talk about South Africa, it would be better if I use South Africa in my question. Then the other one is the leading or the bias questions, where you leading your respondent to a certain direction. So you're already assuming that a certain response is correct. So if you look at the example, you'll ask, how often do you exercise, right? You're assuming that the person is exercising. The right way could be, you can ask if they exercise, they say yes or no, and then those who say yes, then they can say how often do they exercise. Then we also have double-barreled questions, where you are putting across more than one issue in one statement. So it's difficult for the respondent to know what are they supposed to respond about, the first issue, the second issue, or both, because they only have one place where they can respond. Maybe they want to say they agree on this issue, but they don't agree on the second part. So even yourself, when you analyze, if they say they agree, what are they agreeing to? The first part, the second part, or both issues? We don't know. So an example, it's where you're looking at opinions about a workshop they attended. So you say, was the workshop useful and interesting, right? Useful, interesting, they are not the same things. So maybe they want to say it was, no, maybe not, they don't want to say a little bit interesting, maybe that's not that useful for them, but maybe they have different, they have different responses to these two issues, but they don't know now. If they agree, what are they agreeing to? Both, one of them, even yourself, when you analyze, you don't know. Others agreeing to the first, others to the second, others to both. So it's just a confusion. It's now two questions in one, or they can even become three when you've asked them like this. Then this is another example of double-barreled questions. If you're looking at studying patterns of master's students, and then you ask, do you have time to study every day? So you see that it's tapping on two things, having time and every day. So when they respond, you don't know, are they saying they have time to study, or are they saying that they have time to study every day? You don't know, because they might have time, but not every day. So you need to break them up. You could say, do you study every day? Then maybe they can provide the reasons why they study every day, because they are part-time, they are full-time students, or they're employed, those issues. Sorry. Then we also have ambiguous questions, where the wording is not clear, and then your respondents, they attach different meaning. I take it to mean this, Komoto take it to mean something else. It's the same question, but now because it's not clear, it's becoming different questions. Since we are interpreting it differently, we are answering different questions, as I've said. So the other question is here, how often do you visit the library? These response options, I've touched on this, where we use never, occasionally, often, regularly. What is often? What is regularly? So it's better to actually give clear response options, where it can be once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week. That is not confusing. That's very clear to a respondent. They don't have to think about occasionally. What does it mean? I study twice a week. Is it occasionally? Is it often? You don't know. And then we also have double negative questions, which they do create confusion. Because it's got more than one thing as well. The respondents, you don't know what they're agreeing or disagreeing to. So if you're talking about homework, you might have a question like, it's not a good idea not to submit homework on time, right? It's too much. You'll think these questions, they are not there, but they are there. When we review questionnaires, they are there. So even if you are using an existing questionnaire, mistakes still do creep in. So you must still check that questionnaire. If it's the one that you are designing yourself or you are adapting, you must be on the lookout for these things. So you could ask, is it a better idea to submit homework late? And then they can agree. That is easier to digest than this is. It is not a good idea not to submit homework on time. So in terms of, so these are some of the things that you need to be on the lookout for in terms now of the wording. Some guidelines in terms of the structure, it is advisable to start with what easy questions that are pleasant so that the respondent can relax and you can build rapport. And you must also ensure that the questions that are at the beginning, they explicitly address the objectives of the survey. I know the norm is to start with demographics, but the guidelines are you don't start with demographics. You move from easy to more difficult. And then you group your questions based on the subject matter. And then you start from general to specific. So you start by asking a general, and then you move to more specific. The sensitive questions that which might make your participants to be uncomfortable, you put them at the end. If you put them at the beginning and then they put them off, then they don't answer the rest of the questionnaire. So you put the sensitive questions at the end. And then you also make sure that you filter your questions and you put instructions to say, if it's online, it's easier to filter because the respondent, if they select this, then they only see what is applicable to them. If it's a paper, you need to put the instructions to say, if you select this, then skip to the next section or they must skip to the right place. So the example about moving from general to more specific. So if you are talking about job satisfaction, you can ask a question, how important are flexible hours in evaluating job satisfaction? What factors are important in evaluating job satisfaction? You can see that the second question is more general. The second one is more specific. So the right way would be to start with question 2 and then move to specifics. So we move from general to more specific in terms of a theme, that is with regards to a particular theme. So even the look, this is the layout. The layout is important, but I think if we are doing online, that falls off because you only see what you are busy with. You don't see the entire questionnaire most of the time. But you want to get the questionnaire completed. You want it to be completed accurately so that the analysis that is drawn may be based on accurate information. So the layout, because I've seen other people, they will have, so you put your questions sometimes in tables. The questions that are about a same theme, you'll put them in the same table. So this is just a small example to say if you tell people to circle, as opposed to if you put yes, no, and they just tick. This is paper. If you are doing paper, not to put too many questions on one page, not to use a busy design. And then the typeface, you must use something that is practical, a font that is easy to read. But if you are doing online, obviously there's some of these things, they fall off. But you need to talk about, introduce the objectives, introduce yourself at the beginning, and introduce maybe, yeah, you are what you affiliate to, that you are a student at UNISA, and assure them of anonymity, assure them of confidentiality if you can. The things that you can assure them of those things. And then also explain to them how the information will be used. That will assist you to get buy-in. So before we do the last portion, I think at this point, Komuzo, I'll ask you to send the quiz, and then while they do the quiz, I can also take some questions. So I think maybe we can move on to the quiz. Yes, the responses. So this is just for you, even though I didn't give the instruction, but just to see what could be potentially problematic with the way the question is asked. So this is one question says, was the workshop easy to understand and useful? So the way I put the response options, it's allowing you to select more than one, right? So if you see that there is more than one issue with the question, I've put the response option so that you can select more than one. So here, the first one, yes, it is double-barreled, right? Because it's talking about useful. It might not maybe be easy to understand, but you might still find that it was useful. Maybe you struggle to understand, but it was still useful. Or it was easy to understand, but not that useful. So it's two things in one question. Here, I suppose maybe if you say, maybe you should have used, was it easy or not easy? Because it's as if it's coming from a positive point, kind of. So maybe you could have said, was it or was it not? So that you give as you phrase it, they can think about the both sides and not the one side. Then this one, it says, to what extent do you like tea? This one is vague. Yes, it's also leading. It's more like, do you like tea? It's assuming you like tea, right? And yeah, it is leading. It's vague because I mean, tea. Is it rape? What kind of tea? Is it, tea in general, a specific tea? And is it the taste of the tea? Is it that it's iced tea? So it also has vagueness in it. So maybe if you want something like this, you can tap into the different dimensions where you want them to talk about the taste. Maybe they must also talk about the type, maybe the temperature, whether it's cold or whether it's hot tea. But here it's a mixture. Someone will say, but I drink iced tea. Usually people, when they talk about tea, they talk about hot tea. Can I respond? How do I respond to this? Because maybe they're talking about hot tea. I'm thinking about iced tea. So those things, they are not accounted for here. It's on the vague side. I do not think the workshop is not too long. So I think this one, it's a giveaway, right? It is double negative. Yes, it's got two negative. I do not think the workshop is not too long. And then this one, it says, how interested are you in learning the essential skill of data analysis in SPSS? It's leading, right? Because it's assuming that the skill is essential. You are already telling them that the skill is essential. According to you, you've put now your social position about this, that the skill you consider. So you are influencing them. So when they read this, they must see SPSS, data analysis in SPSS, as essential. So you're influencing their take on data analysis in SPSS. You've already said it's essential. If you hadn't put essential there, they might have responded in a different way. So you are leading them. And then the other one is approximately what percentage of M&D workshops have you attended so far, right? So because I said you can select more than one thing here, the one thing could be the categories, they are overlapping, right? You can see that. And it's also assuming that you've attended, we can't talk about today's ones. Yes, you've attended today's one, but you haven't done the assessment for today's ones. Yeah, maybe you can talk about, yeah, today's one. I think it's just that it's overlapping because you have attended today's one. So it's not leading. Everyone who's responding here has attended the workshop, some workshop, because you are here today. So even if you hadn't attended before, but you can respond based on today's one. So it is it's the overlapping. But I suppose if the respondents say it's vague, as a researcher, I would have to engage them and see why are they perceiving it as vague, because it's important for me that it doesn't appear vague. So if they say it's vague, I have to ask them what makes it vague? How can I put it in a better way? Yes. But in this context is to the purpose of the exercise, obviously not everything is applicable here. But if it was a pilot and I was getting that feedback, I would have to look at it. And then this one, it says, from the CGS M&D workshops you've attended, how often have you provided feedback? So this one is different to the previous one. The previous one, everyone has attended a workshop, but with this one, even though you've attended a workshop, it might be today, but not everyone has actually provided feedback. So it's leading, it's assuming that you have. So it's leading and it's also vague. The response options that are being used here, they are vague. We spoke about this. Vague as in what is always. Always, at least, is always. Sometimes and rarely. Is it I attend twice a month, every week, depending on the frequency. And then this one is did the quantitative research design workshop assist you with selecting an appropriate design for your study? So this one also is a problem. It's already assuming that you attended the workshop. What if the people didn't attend? So it is leading. It's not vague because this is the quantitative. The only problem here is that it's assuming that you've attended, and it's also leading. It's leading in a sense, it's talking about assisting you. It's not saying, did it assist you or not assist you? And then this one says, how often are you able to attend the M&D workshops on time? Are you not able? So this is also double. The doubleness, I suppose, introduces vagueness because once it's double, you get confused. Double negative. Once it's double negative, you get confused. Then maybe it becomes vague. So vague can be relevant whenever it's double negative. It creates a confusion and it becomes vague. You don't really know what are they asking. It's not clear. And then this one, it's talking about which of the following do you believe is most responsible for high costs? Government, public institution. These are the response options. So here they said it's vague. Others said it's leading. It can have an overlapping aspect to it. Someone can say government and public. It's more or less the funding is coming from government. So it can have vagueness into it. Overlapping into it. It can have not double negative, no. Well, I don't know if you say, unless you believe that the costs are not high. But if you believe the costs are high, then it's not really leading. It's maybe talking about a known phenomenon, something that is known, that has been established to say in South Africa, the costs are high. It's an established truth. It's known. So you are not really influencing anyone. It's known. And then this one, it's leading also because it's assuming that, yes, it's leading you to say your previous employer do better than the current one. It's assuming that actually they are doing better, the current one. So I suppose as we engage on these issues, on the questions, you can see they can have more than one issue, but sometimes there is an overarching issue. But for questionnaire design, if your pilot is saying they finding this to be vague, then you have to pay attention, even if you as a researcher, to you, it doesn't come across as vague. So to just get back to the presentation, thank you for taking part. I hope it engaged you on what we've been covering. So just to wrap up, I'm aware that we are behind time. So just to wrap up, I'll talk about the pilot. So the pilot is very important to test so that you are able to pick up if there are questions that are not clear, questions that people are interpreting differently, grammar issues, format issues, language issues, as someone has indicated. So as I said, to ensure that you've covered the concepts, you need to send the questionnaires to experts. But now to pilot, you can start with friends, colleagues, right? That is a first level. You can start with those ones. Then once you have inputs from those ones, eventually the questionnaire has to be piloted by people who represent your target population. So you can send you send the questionnaires. If it's online, you can send it and you ask the people to actually give you feedback. So you can outline what they need you to give you feedback on. If there are questions that are not clear, if the sequence doesn't make sense, all those issues. And ideally, you also need to observe your participants as they answer their questionnaire so that you can observe those non-verbal communication cues that you're not going to pick up from their comments. So if you observe them as they complete, you can observe that they are pausing for long on certain questions. You can observe that they are actually taking longer than you'd expected. So you are able to see their non-verbal communication, and you can also engage them on that and ask them, you went fast on this section, but when you got to this section or when you got to this question, you paused. Maybe they can explain why. Then they will tell you they didn't understand the question or it took time for them to understand the question. So the non-verbal observing them is also important. And then, yes, ask them to give you comment, because that's the purpose of the pilot. And if you have a reasonable, maybe 15, we can also, with the pilot data, test for reliability. We can't test validity, but we can at least test for reliability. So reliability, we look at the extent to which the measurement can be replicated, it's consistent and dependable. So the questions, do they yield the same response if the same question is posed to the same respondent repeatedly? So if I give it to you and I give it to you again, will you respond the same way? And also reliability, it's also about, if I ask you, do you enjoy your job? And I also ask you, do you look forward to going to work? I expect your responses to be consistent, because those two questions, they touch on the same thing. I ask you, do you enjoy your job? Do you look forward to going to work? So those two things, I expect consistency. So that's what we check for when we look at consistency. Cronbach alpha, it's very common, a measure that we use, even though now we also have composite reliability and other measures. I hear there is literature that says Cronbach, that is discrediting the Cronbach alpha, but those are new developments. They will have to also be validated by other studies. Then validity, it's about how well that instrument measures whatever it is claiming to measure. So it's about accuracy. So the reliability, it's about replicate, how can we replicate? Is it consistent, dependable? Validity, it's about accuracy. Then we look at content validity, construct validity. Construct validity is a statistical measure. Content validity, it's different. So it's just to ensure that it includes adequate and representative set of items that tap into the concept. So I have seen before other researchers in another study where they send the questionnaires to the questions because it's about the concept, whether these questions are tapping adequately to the concept. So they will send this to experts, and the experts would rate these questions, and then you can actually analyze them. There is an index that you can compute that will give you an indication of whether the extent to which content validity is maintained. And there's also phase validity, where it's based on the surface. When you look at the questions, do they appear to measure the concept? And then construct validity, it's also, as I said, it's about accuracy. We want to know, given a certain measurement scale, is it measurement the theoretical construct that it's expected to measure? So is this instrument measuring the theoretical construct that it's actually claiming to measure? And then we look at it in terms of convergent discriminant validity. Discriminant validity, it talks about the degree to which the measures of constructs are in fact, if there are two constructs that are related, it talks about the degree to which they are actually in fact related. And discriminant validity, it's about discrimination, that if variables are measuring this construct, they have to correlate with that construct more than with any other construct in the study. So a variable can be related to other constructs, but in terms of its relation, it must relate more to the construct that it's measuring. So that is discrimination. A variable cannot be all over. We have to be able to say this variable is measuring this construct, because when we look at its correlation, we can see that it correlates high with this construct that it's measuring, as opposed to the other constructs that are there in the study. So I'm going to pause here.